German soldiers, part of the Nazi killing machine. They were also of Jewish descent.
You were wearing the uniform of the army that had killed your father?
That's correct.
Your mother?
Yes.
And there were tens of thousands of them.
You're not ashamed of serving in the military?
Some even served with the approval of Adolf Hitler himself.
These certificates basically said, you know, I, Adolf Hitler, declare you of German blood.
How did they escape extermination? And how do they see their service now? Josh Mankiewicz with Hiding in Plain Sight. It's a tough job, but somebody's got to do it. And Consumer Reports did. They raided the freezer to rate your favorite ice creams, searching for the best tasting of all.
We don't go by yuck, we don't go by yum. We go by, does it meet the criteria that we're looking for?
Lee Thompson with a Dateline Consumer Reports exclusive. From our studio in Rockefeller Center, here is Jane Pauley.
Good evening. Maybe you're feeling a nagging unease about the world today, a little more vulnerable than before. Keep that in mind as you watch tonight's story about the darkest days of World War II. You know about the Holocaust and the millions sent to their deaths and Hitler's final solution. But what you may not know about is the thousands, perhaps hundreds of thousands, of German men with Jewish backgrounds who were able to escape extermination, and how they did it by hiding from the Nazi killing machine. But incredibly, hiding in plain sight. Here's Josh Mankiewicz.
I was afraid for every minute from them. I was suspicious for every move from them. I thought that behind me somebody's going to kill me.
He's Jewish, but during World War II, Nehemiah Verma not only wore a German army uniform, he helped feed and supply German soldiers. Not because he sympathized with them, but simply to survive.
Any sense of guilt about that? That you're sort of, you know, working with the same army that wanted to exterminate you?
The best hiding place was in the mouth of the wolf.
And Verman wasn't alone. It might surprise you to learn that while Adolf Hitler was working toward the domination of Europe and the extermination of the Jews, thousands of young men of Jewish descent were serving in the Führer's armed forces.
How many of the other German boys in the army knew that your mother was a Jew?
In the army, nobody knew.
You didn't tell anyone?
No.
The irony is stunning. Even as millions of Jews were falling in concentration camps, some soldiers who were Jewish by Nazi standards became decorated and distinguished German heroes. And incredibly, thousands of partial Jews served with Adolf Hitler's personal blessing.
It's totally shocking. In fact, when I began this research, I didn't even believe that this was possible.
It's an unusual chapter in Holocaust history that might not have been publicized without the fervent, if not obsessive, work of a rather unusual historian. Bryan Mark Rigg isn't a grandchild of survivors or an established Holocaust scholar. In fact, he's an earnest 31-year-old former Marine who had no real interest in the Holocaust before visiting Germany the summer after his freshman year at Yale.
You know, such a beautiful place, and it was an event of unimaginable evil that took place here.
We spoke with Bryan Rigg at the place where the details of Hitler's final solution were agreed on by the Führer's senior counselors, the infamous Wannsee Villa in Berlin, a city that's also the birthplace of Bryan Rigg's search for the truth about the overlap between German Jews and the German army.
I was here in Berlin in 1992 learning German, and I asked one of my instructors if he could recommend a film I could watch to improve my German, and he told me that I should go see the film Europa, Europa.
The film is based on the true story of a German Jew who survived the war by working for the German army and hiding his real identity. In the theater, Rigg met an older man who told him he had lived a similar life, and Rigg wondered if there were more like him. After 4 years of crisscrossing Germany by bicycle and train, Rigg says he found 430 former soldiers and documented thousands more who were both German and of Jewish descent.
It's an enormous piece of work that has to be respected.
Michael Berenbaum is a distinguished Holocaust scholar, one of several professors who warned Bryan Rigg not to waste his time trying to find these soldiers. He says he was happy to be proven wrong.
It's the triumph of perseverance. Without perseverance, this could not have been done.
He surprised you.
It shocked me.
Rigg went on to get a doctorate from Cambridge University and to write a book called Hitler's Jewish Soldiers. That's where the research ends and the controversy begins.
It strikes me that in a way that's a little bit of a misnomer. Some of them didn't consider themselves Hitler's soldiers, and a lot of them didn't consider themselves Jewish.
So the reason why I named my book Hitler's Jewish Soldiers was Hitler thought of these people as Jewish, and they were only his Jewish soldiers.
The provocative title has provoked a response, even from his friends.
To call these people Hitler's Jewish soldiers is, A, to presume a Nazi definition of who is Jewish, namely to do it not by the religion we live, by the identity we affirm, but the accident of the blood that we have within it. That's a Nazi definition.
The Nazis referred to children of mixed marriages as half-Jews or quarter-Jews, or used the collective term Mischlinge.
Mischlinge it's a horrible term. It means bastard, mutt, hybrid, and the and nowadays it's used for dogs of mixed breed, mutts. It just shows you the connotation behind the word that the Nazis used for these people.
And by using that Nazi definition, Rigg has come up with a jaw-dropping estimate that has caught the attention of historians worldwide.
I estimate that 150,000 Mischling soldiers served during the Third Reich.
If true, that would represent less than 1% of the German armed forces, and several Holocaust scholars say even that estimate of 150,000 Mischling soldiers is way too high. Rigg says he bases his estimate on birth and mixed marriage records, but his larger point is that their existence in the German military, no matter what the number, is in itself significant.
How could it have been that the Nazi Party, so committed to eliminating Jews, not just from here in Germany, but elsewhere in Europe as well, would allow half-Jews or people with one Jewish grandparent to serve in the German army?
I think on the one hand, Hitler allowed these men to serve because he did not want to deny the Wehrmacht so many potential soldiers.
So the Fuhrer's desire to field an army was stronger than his hatred for Jews?
Well, that might have been one reason, but it's very difficult to find rational explanations for Hitler's behavior.
Just as hard to explain is why anyone of Jewish descent would have wanted to serve. In fact, at the outset of the war, men the Nazis called half-Jews were drafted. They had to serve. Not in the Gestapo or the SS, both filled with true believer Nazis charged with enforcing Hitler's racial policies, but in the regular armed forces. Some served as a way of hiding themselves, some as a way of protecting their families, and for some it was simply an extension of the life they had led before the war. This was the first concentration camp the Germans built, Dachau, outside Munich in 1933. Today, large portions of the camp stand relatively undisturbed, both as a memorial and as a lesson. And to understand the lesson of what happened here, you also have to understand that long before it was fatal to be a Jew in Germany, it was an inconvenience, an obstacle to a successful life. And that's why many Jews and partial Jews did everything they could to keep their religious background a secret. Today, Friedemann Lichtwitz is 83. His father was a Jew who went to synagogue on Friday nights. Friedemann never went with him. Like his mother, he was raised as a Christian. You didn't like being called Jewish.
Yes, you were persecuted and you couldn't say anything. You had to keep it hidden that you were a half-Jew, as they called it. And that was not pleasant.
Hans-Geert Falkenberg, also raised Protestant, remembers having a chip on his shoulder about being called a half-Jew.
If a 10-year-old boy or 11-year-old boy is told in biology by a teacher that the Aryan race is the most wonderful race and the Jewish race is minor and the most terrible things are mixed up people. So from that moment on, I tried to behave differently, to prove said I was not minor.
You weren't raised Jewish, you didn't feel Jewish, but you knew that teacher was talking about you.
Yeah.
But in 1935, life in Germany changed, not just for Jews, but for people of partial Jewish descent as well. That's when Hitler passed the Nuremberg Laws, which not only redefined what a Jew was, but also severely restricted the ability of Jews to work and function in society. Though many saw Hitler and the Nazi Party as a political fad that wouldn't last, Jews who could afford to began fleeing Germany in large numbers. For those who couldn't get out, life was turning bleak. By 1939, Jews were being corralled in ghettos, deported to concentration camps. Because they'd been drafted, many young men could only watch as their Jewish relatives left Germany. They had no choice but to stay and fight.
I went into the army at the first day of the war, yes, on the 26th of August, 1939.
What would have happened if you hadn't gone in the army? What would have happened if you'd left
I
the
would have been a deserter.
So that was an easy choice.
There was no other choice at that moment.
As they started joining the German army in the late 1930s, the soldiers the Nazis called Mischlinge were filled with dread, terrified both of the men they were fighting against and the ones they were fighting next to. Would life in the army protect these men from the terror that was about to roll across Europe?